out the cellular respiration in terms of that glucose molecule and what our ATP production has been. So at this point, we've looked at that glucose molecule. It went through glycolysis and it went through the aerobic respiration, which takes place in the mitochondria, so that we end up getting those 36 ATPs. Sugar, however, is not the only food source we take in, okay? It is the one that's going to give us a huge amount of energy, and energy relatively quickly. But our foodstuffs, if we eat a balanced diet, we should have sugars, we should have fats, and we should have proteins in our diet. When we take in the lipids, if you remember, lipids are in that form that has the 3 fatty acid tails, okay? That's what we know as the triglyceride, okay? Now, when we take that in, we're going to break it down and we're going to create what we know as a free fatty acid. Simply one of those little tails, okay? These are going to be able to get taken up by our cells. So we can see it move into a cell, and that can now be used as an energy source. So once we have that free fatty acid tail, okay, move into the cell, once again, it's going to go through this oxidation reduction process. Now, for the triglycerides, the cell in the cytoplasm breaks it down. That's not glycolysis, okay? The remnants that we get, those fatty acid tails, look at what happens, okay? That fatty acid tail, what structure are we now entering right now in the cell? Where does that ATP production occur? The mitochondria. So we're entering the mitochondria. Mitochondria is where the Krebs cycle is going to occur. That fatty acid tail, one of the things that can happen, it can move into the mitochondria and acetyl coenzyme A will attach to it. What does that fatty acid tail look like? What is the backbone of that fatty acid tail? What was it that was the backbone for the glucose? Carbon. The fatty acid tails, are they not carbon chains also? When you looked at the glycerol head, and we had the 3 fatty acid tails, were they not carbons to hydrogens also? So once again, we've got a molecule that has a carbon backbone. So now it can go into and be attached by the acetyl coenzyme A. What was the job of this acetyl coenzyme A? Showed it in the video. It was that huge pink looking blob thing that attached to that carbon chain. And what did it begin to do for that carbon chain? It took it into the first step of the Krebs cycle. So now we've got a carbon chain that gets attached to the acetyl coenzyme A attaches to it, and it will then start it in the citric acid cycle. What happens to the structure of that carbon backbone in the Krebs cycle? Because now that we've entered the Krebs cycle, there's no difference. you see what I'm saying? There's no difference at this point what molecule it was, whether it was the glucose or the fat. We've now entered that Krebs cycle. And what was the result of sending that carbon chain through the Krebs cycle? But how? What happened? What happened to that carbon chain as it began to shift and move and shift and move and shift and move through the Krebs cycle?
Lost electrons.
We lost electrons that got, what happened to those?
Electron carriers.
Our electron carriers picked them up. And we picked them up with what? What goes along with the little E's? The hydrogens. And now they're going to get shuttled to the electron transport chain. So we used a different molecule, but the result was the same. But we just entered the process at a different point. That's how the body will use the fats to make energy. Now, when we use lipids, the other thing that can happen to lipids in the body, they can become what we know as ketone bodies. All right? So, in this breaking down of that triglyceride, the fatty acid, we can break it down, and as we break it down, we can form ketone bodies. This is a term that we know as ketogenesis. When you hear the term genesis, what does it make you think about? The beginning, okay? And the keto is referring to these fatty acids, all right? So it's basically, these ketone bodies, the liver is going to give us a little bit of help. Now, what's left over is what we can have come back and become a part of this attachment for the acetyl coenzyme A. So it's like a byproduct that gets created. When we use the sugar, the byproduct was the CO2. Okay? When we use the fatty acid, our byproduct is going to be the ketone bodies, if that makes sense. Okay? So we're simply adding another food stuff, but we come in at a different point. Now this one right here, with the amino acids, which we're going to get to in another slide, but it's kind of letting you know that some of those amino acids can be attached to the acetyl coenzyme A. And what's going to happen if we get attachment to acetyl coenzyme A? What happens? The job of the acetyl coenzyme A is what? Take us to that first step of the Krebs cycle. Well, guess what amino acid's backbone is? Carbon. So once again, they can take that carbon chain, the acetyl coenzyme A can attach to it, take it to that first step in the Krebs cycle. That's how we're using other foodstuffs. But for the most part, probably anything that you've talked about up to this point about cellular respiration and ATP production has only involved the glucose molecule, right? So we use more molecules than just carbs. I mean, now, don't get me wrong, I would love to just eat nothing but sugar, okay? I would love that, but I can't. Body can't survive on that. So now, with the proteins. The proteins, do you guys remember me talking about how the body wants to get energy? How does the body want to get energy first? Our carbs. Second, lipids. How is it that we don't want the body to get energy? We don't want the body to get energy from proteins, because if it does, the proteins that it's going to break down first is going to be the actin and myosin in muscle, which cannot be rebuilt after a certain amount of breaking down takes place. So the muscles can't be built back up. So protein metabolism. Non-essential amino acids. What's the difference between non-essential and essential?
The body can make the non-essential.
The body can make the non-essential. Essential, the only way we can get it is through our diet. So, the body, with the non-essential, it can form them. The process, transamination, not transanimation, okay? Amination, amine, amino, okay? Trans, flip and switch, okay? So transamination, they can take one of the keto acids, add an amine group, and form one of our non-essentials. Now, we can also eat the non-essentials, okay? But in cases where foodstuffs are not what they should be, think of famine, starvation, that sort of thing, you're not getting all of the proper nutrients in the levels that you need. Now, we know we need the AAs because they've got to make our proteins. But if we use them for energy, they will be oxidated. Oxidated means what? We're going to lose electrons. Then we're going to have to balance that with H pluses, okay? That means that that particular product, we're breaking it down, pulling the energy from it. Now, in cases where it's acute, hopefully recovery can occur, okay? But in cases where it's chronic, it's not, okay? It's just not going to happen. When we do deaminate these amino acids, we form ammonia. Now, hopefully, the goal is the body, like I said, under acute conditions, the body can withstand this for a little while, not very long. And hopefully, the ammonia can be excreted out of the body. However, if we have too much get broken down over a long period of time, the body can't use or get rid of all of that ammonia. And that's going to be bad in the system. We also get some keto acids, all right? Our hope is that the body can metabolize each of those, excrete them out as waste. One thing about this, when the body uses proteins as the energy source, these amino acids, we don't store them. That's why the body has to look to a source to break down. And the first source it's going to break down is the actin and myosin in the muscles of the body. There are wasting away diseases that affect the buildup of the muscles. Let's see. Sclerosis is the one where it hardens. Dystrophy. One of the biggest ways that I can think of where the body utilizes the protein and muscle for a food source is people who are in last stages of cancer. People who, cancer is an overgrowth of cells, and the cells don't stop dividing. They're in constant cellular division. So they're constantly demanding energy. And basically what happens is blood vessels actually increase in number to that area where this overgrowth of cells is occurring. And so what will happen is it will demand more and more and more energy to feed those growing cells. And in the last stages, it doesn't matter, and at that point, people have probably gone through chemotherapy, they've been really sick, At this point, the body's pulling it from the muscles, and their muscles waste away. And usually a lot of people who are in the end stages of cancer, before they really die, they're nothing but skin and bones. That's one of the best examples I can give for the wasting away.
It's actually, as you're saying this, it's reminding me of my grandma, who's still alive right now, but she has oral cancer, and they've done a whole lot of surgery on her, because it's right here under her lower jaw, and I can notice a lot of things are building. Not only she's having a lot of scabs and everything, but also I'm noticing she's deteriorating. She's getting, she's slowly fading away.
Yeah, fading away. Right, and that's what can happen when you get to the end stages. How long has she had it?
And I think a good amount of time. It's been a long time.
Okay. Okay.
So, she's been through a good amount of surgeries because they've been taking it from all her body pretty much, just so to be able to be normal. Of course, now it's just.
So basically, when they diagnosed it, it had metastasized. Okay. Yeah. And that's what will happen. That's probably the best example I can give. That. The muscle getting broken down. People who are in situations of severe famine and starvation, you see how they're really just skin and bone, but their bellies are really huge, okay? The ascites, the fluid that builds up, okay? So it's really different things that can happen that'll break down that muscle. And the sad part about it is once it's past a certain point, there's no recovery.